The email notification popped up on my screen as I was finishing a quarterly earnings call with the board. Chelsea Spencer, wedding invitation, my cousin. The same cousin I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. The same cousin whose father, my uncle, had stood silently by when my own father told me that technology isn't for girls and that I was wasting my time with these computer dreams. I stared at the notification for a full minute while my CFO continued presenting fourth quarter projections. Spencer Tech had exceeded expectations again. Our newest software platform was revolutionizing how small businesses handled customer data. The company I'd built from nothing was now valued at just under $2 billion. June? Any thoughts on the Asia-Pacific expansion? My COO's voice pulled me back to the boardroom. Sorry, Morgan. Yes, proceed as planned, but let's review the Singapore regulations one more time before finalizing. I closed my laptop, effectively ending the meeting. That's all for today. Thank you, everyone. As the room cleared, I opened the email again. The invitation was elegant but simple. Chelsea was marrying someone named Thomas Williams in 6 weeks. But it was the personal note she'd added that made my stomach tighten. June. I know it's been forever, and I understand if you say no, but I'd really love it if you'd be my maid of honor. Despite everything, you've always been more like a sister to me than a cousin. Mom and Dad will be there, of course, and yes, so will yours. But this is my day, and I want you there. Please think about it. Love, Chelsea. My parents. The thought of seeing them again after all this time sent a rush of conflicting emotions through me. The last time we'd spoken was at my college graduation, when I'd turned down a position at my father's accounting firm to pursue my own venture. "You'll come crawling back when you fail," he'd said, not even attempting to lower his voice as other families celebrated around us. I never crawled back. I never failed. My assistant knocked softly on the door. "Your 3 o'clock is here, Mrs. Spencer." "Thanks, Liam. Give me 5 minutes." When he left, I typed a quick response to Chelsea. "Congratulations. I'll think about it and get back to you soon." I didn't sleep that night. My penthouse overlooking Seattle's skyline, usually a space of comfort and triumph, felt hollow somehow. I kept thinking about Chelsea. She'd been 14 when I left home at 22, still young enough to believe the family narrative about me. What did she think now? What had she heard? By morning, I'd made my decision. I called Liam and told him to clear my schedule for the week of the wedding. Then I emailed Chelsea, "I'd be honored to be your maid of honor. Send me the details." Her response came within minutes, a string of excited emojis followed by, "OMG, thank you so much. I never thought you'd say yes. Call me tonight and I'll tell you everything." That evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of Cabernet, my finger hovering over Chelsea's number. The Seattle rain pattered softly against the glass behind me. This was a mistake. I should cancel. June? Is that really you? Chelsea's voice hadn't changed much. Still that same bubbly enthusiasm. "It's me. Congratulations on your engagement." "Thank you. I can't believe you said yes. Everyone's going to be so shocked. You're like famous now." I took a sip of wine. "I'm not famous, Chelsea." "Are you kidding? Your face was on the cover of Business Insider last month. 30 under 30, the woman changing how we think about data. Everyone back home has seen it. Even Uncle Richard mentioned it at Sunday dinner. My father had seen my success, had talked about it. The thought was both satisfying and unsettling. "So, tell me about Thomas," I said, changing the subject. Chelsea launched into the story of how they'd met at a coffee shop, how he was a pediatric surgeon, how they'd been together for 3 years. I half listened, watching the rain intensify outside. And the wedding's going to be at the Spencer family lake house, of course. That got my attention. "The lake house? Really?" "Of course. Mom and Dad have fixed it up beautifully in the last few years. You'll barely recognize it." The Spencer Lake House in upstate New York had been the site of every family gathering for generations. My last memory there was my grandfather's funeral when I was 19. I remembered standing at the dock, watching the sunset while my father lectured me about practical career choices. June? Are you still there? Yes, sorry, just memories. Chelsea's voice softened. I know it's complicated with the family, but I've always looked up to you, you know, even after you left. What you've accomplished is amazing. Her words caught me off guard. Thanks, Chelsea. That means a lot. So, as maid of honor, there are a few things we need to discuss. The bridal shower is 3 weeks before the wedding. Can you make it? And the bachelorette weekend is right after that. Nothing crazy, just a spa weekend in the Catskills, I calculated quickly. I can make the weekend before the wedding, but not 3 weeks prior. I have an investor meeting in Tokyo that can't be moved. That's fine. The bachelorette is most important anyway, and you'll be here a few days before the wedding for rehearsals, right? Right? The words felt strange coming out of my mouth. I was really doing this. Going back. After I hung up, I refilled my wine glass and pulled up a satellite view of my hometown on my tablet. Meadowbrook, New York, looked exactly the same from above. The town square, the high school, the library where I'd spent so many afternoons coding while waiting for the ridicule at home to die down. The Spencer Lake House sat at the edge of town, its dock extending into the clear blue water. 10 years. 10 years of building my company, of proving everyone wrong, of deliberately not looking back. And now, in 6 weeks, I would face it all, again. I spent the next month burying myself in work as if I could outrun the approaching confrontation. Spencer Tech was in talks for a major acquisition, a smaller competitor with an impressive encryption algorithm that would integrate perfectly with our platform. The deal kept me distracted during the day, but at night, thoughts of the wedding crept in. Chelsea and I spoke weekly as the date approached. She sent pictures of dresses, flower arrangements, venue decorations. I found myself genuinely invested in her happiness, remembering the little girl who used to follow me around at family gatherings, asking endless questions about computers. 2 weeks before the wedding, as I was finalizing the acquisition paperwork, Chelsea called in a panic. June, everything's falling apart. The florist just canceled. Mom is having a meltdown, and Thomas's parents are being difficult about the rehearsal. Dinner menu. I listened to her vent for 20 minutes, then said, send me the florist's contact information and your flower plans. I'll handle it. You will? But you're so busy. I manage a company with over 300 employees across 4 countries. I can handle a florist. By that evening, I'd not only secured a new florist who could match Chelsea's original vision, but had also arranged for a weekend spa package to be delivered to my aunt's house to calm her nerves. Chelsea was effusive in her gratitude. You're a miracle worker, June. Mom can't stop talking about how amazing you are. It's nothing, I said, ignoring the strange warmth I felt at the thought of my aunt's approval. Just basic negotiation skills. Well, it means everything to me. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you. Your parents asked for your cell number. They want to reach out before the wedding. I hope that's okay? The warmth vanished. I'd rather they didn't, Chelsea. Oh, her disappointment was palpable. I understand. It's just, they seem really eager to reconnect. Mom says Uncle Richard talks about your company all the time now. Now that I'm successful, you mean? That's not fair, June. Isn't it? I sighed, regretting my tone. I'm sorry. This isn't about you. I'll think about it, okay? After we hung up, I poured myself a scotch, neat, the way my father used to drink it. The irony wasn't lost on me. For all my determination to be nothing like Richard Spencer, I'd inherited his taste in liquor, his stubbornness, and his drive. I just channeled it differently. The next day, I had Liam book my flight and accommodations. I couldn't stay at the lake house. That would be too much. Instead, I reserved a suite at the small luxury hotel that had opened in Meadowbrook a few years after I left. Then I called my executive team together. I'll be unreachable for 1 week, I announced, ignoring their surprised expressions. Morgan, we'll handle any emergencies. The acquisition paperwork is complete, but don't execute until I return. Is everything okay, June? Morgan asked, concern evident in her voice. Family matter, I said shortly. It was the first time in 10 years I'd used those words. The week before my departure, I found myself obsessively checking news about Meadowbrook. The town had grown somewhat. New businesses along Main Street, a tech incubator at the community college. I wondered if my success had influenced that in some small way. I also, in a moment of weakness, looked up my parents. My father's accounting practice appeared to be the same size it had always been, successful enough for comfort, but never expanding beyond the town's borders. My mother was still listed as the office manager. Their house, my childhood home, had been refinanced twice in the past 5 years, according to public records. The night before my flight, I received a text from an unknown number. June, it's Dad. Chelsea gave me your number, looking forward to seeing you at the wedding. We have a lot to catch up on. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the delete button. In the end, I didn't respond, but I didn't block the number either. The flight from Seattle to Albany was smooth, but my hands shook slightly as I picked up my rental car. The drive to Meadowbrook would take just under an hour. An hour until I was back where it all began. As I pulled onto the highway, I remembered the day I left. It was raining then too, though it had been summer rather than spring. I'd packed everything. I owned into my used Honda Civic and driven west without a clear destination, just the certainty that I needed to be far away from the constraints of Meadowbrook and my family's expectations. Now I was returning in an Audi A7 with a company valuation sheet that would make my father's eyes bulge. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. The familiar landscape of upstate New York rolled past my window. Dense forests giving way to small towns, then open farmland. When the Welcome to Meadowbrook sign appeared, I felt my chest tighten. The population count had increased by a few hundred since I'd left. I drove slowly down Main Street, taking in the changes. The old hardware store was now a boutique clothing shop. The diner had been renovated but still bore the same name. New coffee shops and restaurants had sprung up, giving the town a more contemporary feel than I remembered. My hotel was just off the town square, a converted mansion with only 20 rooms. As I checked in, the receptionist's eyes widened slightly. June Spencer? The June Spencer? I nodded, bracing myself. My daughter is studying computer science because of you, she said, smiling broadly. She read about you in school last year, local success stories. She'll be so excited that you're here. I hadn't expected this. In my mind, Meadowbrook existed, in a bubble where my achievements were minimized or ignored. That's wonderful, I managed. Tell her to reach out if she ever needs advice. I left my business card on the counter, feeling strangely disconnected from the moment. I'd prepared for hostility or indifference, not admiration. In my suite, I unpacked methodically, arranging my clothes in the closet with the precision that had become second nature. The bachelorette weekend would begin tomorrow evening. I had 24 hours to reacclimate to being in Meadowbrook before facing anyone from my past. I ordered room service and opened my laptop, checking emails until my food arrived. Work was a comfort, familiar territory where I knew exactly who I was and what was expected of me. But as the evening wore on, restlessness set in. I found myself standing at the window, looking out at the town square. Almost without conscious decision, I grabbed my coat and headed out. The spring air was cool against my face as I walked the familiar streets. My feet carried me automatically toward the library, my sanctuary during those difficult high school years. The building looked exactly the same, though the sign announced expanded hours and free coding classes for youth every Saturday. I smiled. At that, wondering again about my inadvertent influence. June Spencer, as I live and breathe. I turned to find Mrs. Abernathy, the librarian who had always saved the new technology magazines for me, standing at the entrance. She was older, of course, her hair completely white now, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Mrs. Abernathy, you're still here." "Where else would I be?" She smiled warmly. "Come inside. We're just closing, but I can make an exception for our most famous patron." I followed her into the library, inhaling the familiar scent of books and wood polish. She led me to her office and produced 2 mugs of tea as if she'd been expecting me. "I've followed your career," she said, nodding toward a bulletin board where my Business Insider cover was pinned alongside other local achievements. "Not surprised, in the least. You always had that spark." "You were one of the few who thought so," I said, accepting the tea. "Your father is a good accountant, but a short-sighted man." She shook her head. "Though I hear he's quite proud of you now." I couldn't help my derisive snort. "Now that I've proven him wrong in the most public way possible." "People can change, June. Not always, but sometimes." We talked for an hour, about the town, about my company, about the coding classes she'd helped establish at the library. When I finally rose to leave, she squeezed my hand. "You did good, girl. Remember that when you see them tomorrow." Back at the hotel, I slept fitfully, dreaming of the lake house and voices that alternately praised and criticized. I woke early, ordered breakfast, and spent the morning reviewing the acquisition documents one last time before sending them to Morgan with my approval. At noon, Chelsea texted, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Spa resort at 5 p.m. Need me to pick you up?" "I have a car," I replied. "Send me the address." I spent the afternoon at the hotel spa trying to relax before the inevitable confrontation. The bachelorette party would include Chelsea's bridesmaids, all hometown girls I vaguely remembered, plus my Aunt Linda, Chelsea's mother. I'd always gotten along well with Aunt Linda, who had treated me with a kind of bemused affection during my rebellious years. It was my own mother, Catherine Spencer, who had been the harder one to please. At precisely 4:45 p.m., I pulled into the resort parking lot. The Catskill Mountain Lodge was rustic but luxurious, exactly Chelsea's style. I checked my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror. My dark hair was pulled back in its usual sleek ponytail, my makeup minimal but precise. I wore designer, jeans and a cashmere sweater, casual but expensive, armor of sorts. I grabbed my overnight bag and Chelsea's gift, a pair of sapphire earrings from Tiffany that had cost more than my father probably made in a month, and headed inside. June, Chelsea, launched herself at me the moment I entered the lobby, enveloping me in a tight hug that smelled of floral perfume and hairspray. She looked the same, but different, still blonde and petite, but more polished now, less the awkward teenager I remembered. "Let me look at you," she said, stepping back. "God, you're gorgeous, and so important looking, like a CEO should look." I smiled despite myself. "You look beautiful, Chelsea. Happiness suits you." She beamed, then turned to the group of women behind her. "Everyone, this is my cousin June. June, you remember Caitlin, Madison, and Zoe from high school, and my mom." Of course, the bridesmaids, all vaguely familiar, waved and smiled with a hint of awe that made me uncomfortable. Aunt Linda stepped forward and embraced me warmly. "June, darling, it's been too long." "Hi, Aunt Linda." I returned the hug stiffly. "You look well, as do you. Success agrees with you." Her eyes, so like my mother's, studied me closely. "Your parents are very proud, you know." I smiled tightly. "So I've heard. Shall we check in?" The weekend proceeded more pleasantly than I'd anticipated. The resort offered massages, facials, and yoga classes, which we all enjoyed. The bridesmaids were friendly but somewhat intimidated by me, which created a comfortable distance. Chelsea was in her element, happily accepting gifts and attention. It was during Saturday's dinner, a private affair in one of the resort's dining rooms, that the conversation finally turned to my life. "So, June, Madison began. What's it like? Being a female CEO in tech? Do you face a lot of discrimination? I took a sip of my wine before answering. Less now than in the beginning. Success has a way of changing how people treat you. Your story is so inspiring, Zoe chimed in, starting with nothing and building an empire. I didn't start with nothing, I corrected her. I had an excellent education and enough privilege to take risks. The narrative of the self-made billionaire is largely a myth. Aunt Linda smiled. Always so modest. Richard told us you're about to acquire another company? For what, $100 million? Of course my father was tracking my business moves. The details aren't public yet, Aunt Linda. Your mother mentioned you're single, she continued, undeterred. No time for dating when you're running an empire, I suppose? I felt Chelsea tense beside me. Mom, we agreed no personal questions. It's just conversation, dear. I placed my napkin beside my plate. I date when I meet someone interesting. My company takes priority most of the time. Not unlike my father putting his accounting practice above everything else. Aunt Linda's smile faltered slightly. Well, you always were just like him. Determined to a fault. The comparison stung more than I wanted to admit. If you'll excuse me, I need some air. I stepped onto the restaurant's terrace, breathing in the cool night air. The Catskills rose in the distance, dark shapes against the star-filled sky. I heard the door open behind me. Sorry about Mom, Chelsea said, leaning against the railing beside me. She means well. It's fine. I should have expected it. Are you really dreading seeing them that much? Your parents? I considered the question. Yes and no. Part of me wants to walk in there and show them exactly what they missed by not believing in me. Another part just wants to avoid the whole thing. They ask about you all the time, you know. Mom says Uncle Richard keeps a file of all your press mentions. I laughed without humor. Monitoring the competition. Chelsea turned to face me fully. Can I tell you something? When I was 14 and you left, I was devastated. You were my hero. The cool older cousin who knew about computers and didn't care what anyone thought. When everyone said you'd fail, I secretly believed you wouldn't. Her words touched something deep inside me. Thank you for that. I get why you stayed away, but maybe it's time to see what's changed. People can surprise you. I thought of Mrs. Abernathy saying nearly the same thing. Maybe, but don't expect a heartwarming reunion at your wedding. I'm there for you, not them. She smiled. That's enough for me. Sunday morning, as we prepared to leave the resort, Chelsea pulled me aside. The rehearsal dinner is Thursday evening. The wedding party is staying at the lake house from Wednesday. Will you join us? I'll be at the rehearsal, but I'm keeping my hotel room. She nodded, understanding. One more thing. I invited you to be maid of honor because you're important to me, but also because I think you deserve to be recognized as the success you are. My fiancé thinks I'm meddling in family affairs that aren't my business. Are you? I asked, more curious than annoyed. She grinned. Ma, absolutely. But with the best intentions. We parted with promises to meet for lunch on Wednesday. As I drove back to Meadowbrook, I considered Chelsea's words. Was I ready to face my parents, not just as their estranged daughter, but as the successful businesswoman they'd never believed I could be? The answer came to me as I passed the Welcome to Meadowbrook sign once more. I didn't have a choice. This confrontation had been brewing for 10 years. It was time. I spent Monday and Tuesday working, remotely from my hotel suite, taking video calls and finalizing the acquisition details. The familiar rhythm of business decisions was comforting amid the emotional turmoil of being back in my hometown. On Wednesday, I met Chelsea at a new cafe on Main Street. She was glowing with pre-wedding excitement, chattering about last-minute details and family arrivals. Thomas's parents got in last night. They're staying at the Meadowbrook Inn, and his sister flies in today with her husband and kids. Oh, and guess what? Blake Peterson asked if you were single. I raised an eyebrow. Blake Peterson from high school? The football player? He's divorced now and owns the largest car dealership in the county, Chelsea informed me with a meaningful, "Look, I'll pass," she laughed. "I figured, but it's funny how everyone's suddenly so interested in you." Her expression turned more serious. "Your mom called me this morning. She wanted to know what time you're arriving tomorrow for the rehearsal." I tensed. "What did you tell her?" "That you'd be there at 6, like everyone else." She reached across the table to touch my hand. "June, they're nervous too, you know." I doubted that. Richard Spencer didn't do nervous. He did controlling, judgmental, and occasionally proud, but only when it served his purposes. "Well, they should be," I said, lightly trying to diffuse the tension. "I'm quite intimidating in a boardroom." Chelsea smiled. "Just try to keep an open mind, okay? For me?" "For you," I agreed, though the promise felt hollow. That evening, I received another text from my father. "Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Your mother is excited too. We have some things to discuss." The business-like tone was so typical of him that I almost laughed. Some things never changed. I didn't respond. Thursday dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for the lakeside rehearsal. I spent the morning on calls, then treated myself to lunch at the diner I'd frequented in high school. The owner recognized me immediately. "June Spencer." "Well, I'll be. Heard you were back in town." He slid a chocolate milkshake in front of me. "On the house. Your usual." I was touched that he remembered. "Thanks, Joe. Place looks good." Business is better than ever. That tech incubator at the college brings in all kinds of new folks. "You're doing, from what I hear." I shook my head. I had nothing to do with that. "Maybe not directly, but when local kids see someone like you make it big, it changes what they think is possible. My granddaughter's studying computer engineering. Now, never would have considered it before." His words stayed with me as I prepared for the rehearsal that evening. I chose my outfit carefully, a silk blouse and tailored pants that spoke of quiet wealth without being ostentatious. My mother would notice the designer labels. She always did. At 5:55 p.m., I pulled into the driveway of the Spencer Lake House. Several cars were already parked in the circular drive, including my father's Mercedes, the same model he'd driven for as long as I could remember. Some things never changed. The house itself looked better than I remembered. The exterior had been repainted, the gardens were immaculate, and a new dock extended into the lake. Money had been spent here, and recently. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. 10 years. 10 years of building a life they weren't part of. 10 years of proving them wrong. And now here I was, back where it all began. A knock on my window startled me. Chelsea stood there, resplendent in a white sundress, her face concerned. "You okay in there?" I nodded, forcing a smile as I exited the car. "Just taking a moment." She hugged me. "Everyone's on the back lawn. Thomas is anxious to meet you. Lead the way." We walked around the house rather than through it, a small mercy I was grateful for. The back lawn sloped gently down to the lake, where white chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing a floral arch. People milled about in small groups, drinks in hand. I recognized Thomas immediately from Chelsea's photos, tall, with kind eyes and a ready smile. He approached us with his hand extended. "The famous June Spencer. Chelsea talks about you constantly." "All good things, I hope," I said, shaking his hand. "The best. Your TED Talk on data privacy was inspiring. I use it in my resident training seminars." I was surprised. "You watch TED Talks on data privacy?" "I'm a pediatric surgeon, but I'm also the hospital's privacy compliance officer. Your perspectives on balancing innovation with user protection are spot on." I liked him immediately. "Chelsea didn't mention you were a privacy advocate." "It's not my most exciting quality," he admitted with a laugh. Chelsea beamed at our interaction. "See? I have excellent taste in favorite people. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on the caterers." As she hurried off, Thomas lowered his voice. She really wanted this reunion to happen. Between you and your parents, I mean. So I gathered. They're over by the bar, he said, nodding toward a white canopy tent. They've been watching the driveway for the last hour. I followed his gaze and saw them, Richard and Catherine Spencer, standing slightly apart from the other guests. My father looked older, his once dark hair now mostly gray. He'd gained weight. My mother was as slim as ever, her blonde hair expensively highlighted, her posture perfect. Thank you for the intelligence, I said, only half joking. Any time. And June, whatever happens, Chelsea and I are in your corner. With that reassurance, I made my way toward the bar tent, stopping to accept a glass of champagne from a passing server. I would face this meeting with a clear head, but appreciated having something to occupy my hands. They saw me coming. My mother nudged my father, who turned to watch my approach. His expression was unreadable, the same mask of careful assessment he'd worn throughout my childhood. Hello, Dad. Mom? June. My father nodded formally, as if I were a business associate rather than his daughter. You look well. Very well, my mother added, her eyes taking in my outfit with practiced precision. Armani. Valentino, actually. It was such a Catherine Spencer comment that I almost smiled despite myself. An awkward silence fell. Around us, other guests pretended not to watch our reunion. Your company's doing exceptionally well, my father finally said. I've been following your progress. The new encryption platform is quite innovative. Thank you. I took a sip of champagne. How's the accounting? Practice? Steady. We've added some tech startups to our client roster. Different challenges than our usual small businesses. My mother touched my arm lightly. We've missed you, June. 10 years is a long time. The contact was so unexpected that I nearly flinched. Yes, it is. Chelsea says you're staying at the hotel rather than here, she continued. There's plenty of room, if you'd like to reconsider. I'm comfortable where I am, thank you. My father cleared his throat. Perhaps we could speak privately? There are some matters we'd like to discuss. Before I could respond, the wedding planner called everyone to attention. If the wedding party could please take their places, we'll begin the rehearsal. Later, I said, grateful for the interruption. I'm needed now. The rehearsal proceeded smoothly. As maid of honor, I stood beside Chelsea, holding her bouquet during the practice vows, walking the processional route with Thomas's best man, his brother David. Throughout it all, I felt my parents' eyes on me. During the rehearsal dinner, I was seated at the main table with Chelsea, Thomas, and their immediate families. My parents were at the next table over, close enough to observe but not to interact directly. The arrangement was perfect for my purposes. After dinner, as guests mingled on the terrace overlooking the lake, my father approached me again. June, we really do need to speak with you. Privately. His tone, the one that had always brooked no argument, sparked a familiar rebellion in me. Whatever you have to say can be said here, Dad. It's a family matter. Then it involves me, and I'm comfortable right here. I gestured to the terrace where we stood. He sighed, then glanced at my mother, who nodded slightly and joined us. Fine. As you wish. He lowered his voice. The accounting practice is struggling, has been for several years now. The economic downturn hit us hard, and we've had to take out loans against the house. This was not what I'd expected. I'm sorry to hear that. We're not looking for sympathy, my mother said quickly, but we are looking toward the future. Your father is 65 this year, retirement age. I see. And suddenly, I did see. And you want what exactly? My father straightened, his business face firmly in place. We'd like to propose a partnership, Spencer and Spencer. We bring our client base and expertise in traditional accounting. You bring your tech knowledge and capital. The firm could expand regionally, maybe even nationally with the right investment. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. After 10 years of silence, after telling me my dreams were worthless, he wanted me to bail out his failing business? Let me get this straight, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You didn't speak to me for a decade. You never once reached out to congratulate me on my success. And now that your business is in trouble, you want me to rescue it? That's not what this is, my mother insisted. We're offering you a chance to reunite the family business, to create a legacy. I already have a legacy, Mom. It's called Spencer Tech. I built it without any help from either of you. My father's expression hardened. You've always been stubborn, June, just like me. But this isn't about pride. It's about family. Family? I laughed softly. You didn't seem concerned about family when you told me I was wasting my time with computer dreams. Or when you said I'd come crawling back after I failed. That was a long time ago, he said dismissively. People change. Yes, they do. I changed from the girl desperate for your approval into a woman who doesn't need it. My mother placed a restraining hand on my father's arm as his face flushed. June, please, just think about it. We're not getting any younger, and the Spencer name means something in this community. Together we could... No. The word came out sharper than I intended, drawing glances from nearby guests. I lowered my voice. No, thank you. I'm not interested in rescuing Spencer Accounting or creating a family dynasty. My company is doing just fine without the Spencer name from Meadowbrook. My father's jaw tightened. So that's it? You'll let your parents struggle in their retirement out of spite? The accusation hit a nerve, but I held firm. This isn't spite, Dad. This is me recognizing a bad business proposal when I hear one. If you need financial help, that's a different conversation. But I won't spend millions revitalizing an outdated business model for the sake of your pride. Our pride? He scoffed. That's rich coming from you. Parading around in your designer clothes, showing off how much better you are than where you came from. Richard, my mother warned, but he was too far gone. You think you're so special because you got lucky in tech? Because some venture capitalists took a chance on your little software idea? Your success isn't sustainable, June. The market will correct, and then where will you be? Each word was like a slap, so familiar it almost felt like coming home. Almost. My company employs over 300 people, I said quietly. We have offices in 4 countries. Our software protects millions of users' data every day. That's not luck, Dad. That's hard work and vision. 2 things you never gave me credit for. June, my mother began, but I cut her off. I came here for Chelsea, not for this. I placed my champagne glass on a nearby table. If you're struggling financially, we can discuss options, but not here and not like this. With that, I walked away, making my way through the crowd toward Chelsea, who was watching the exchange with concern. Everything okay? She asked as I approached. Fine, but I think I'll head back to the hotel. It's been a long day. She searched my face. What did they say to you? Nothing important. I forced a smile. The rehearsal went beautifully. You're going to be a stunning bride. June, I'll see you tomorrow, okay? Text me if you need anything. I left before she could press further, slipping away through the side gate rather than walking back through the house. As I reached my car, I heard footsteps behind me. June, wait! My mother hurried toward me, her heels sinking slightly into the gravel driveway. Mom, I really don't want to continue this conversation. Just listen, please. She glanced back toward the house. Your father didn't handle that well. He never does when he's scared. Scared? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. Dad doesn't do scared. Of course he does. Why do you think he fought so hard against your tech ambitions? He was terrified you'd fail and be hurt. He couldn't protect you in a world he didn't understand. I leaned against my car, so he tried to force me into a world he did understand. Accounting. Yes. She sighed. It was wrong. We know that now. But June, he really is proud of you. We both are. The proposal tonight, it wasn't just about money. It was his way of trying to reconnect, to be part of your world. By asking me to save his business? By asking you to join forces. Yes, we need help. More than just financial help. The firm needs to modernize, to adapt. Who better to lead that than you? I studied my mother's face, the fine lines around her eyes, the anxiety in her expression. For the first time, I saw her not as Catherine Spencer, the perfect accountant's wife, but as a woman watching her security crumble. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Not the partnership, that's still a no, but I'll think about how I might help." Relief washed over her face. "That's all I ask. And June, it really is good to see you. You've grown into quite a remarkable woman." The compliment, so unexpected from the mother who had always found me slightly too loud, too opinionated, too much, left me momentarily speechless. "Thank you," I managed. "I'll see you tomorrow." Back at my hotel, I poured myself a scotch and stepped onto the balcony. The town square below was quiet, the street lamps casting pools of light on the empty benches. I pulled out my phone and called Morgan. "Boss? Everything okay?" Her voice was alert despite the late hour. "I need you to look into something, Spencer. Accounting in Meadowbrook, New York. I want to know their financial position, outstanding loans, client base, everything. Your family's firm?" She sounded surprised, but didn't question further. "I'll have it for you by morning." "Thank you." After we hung up, I sat with my scotch and my thoughts. My parents wanted a bailout, wrapped in the guise of a family reconciliation. Or was it the other way around? A reconciliation disguised as a business proposal because that was the only language my father knew how to speak? Either way, I wasn't interested in saving Spencer Accounting. But as I watched the quiet town below, an idea began to form, something that could address the situation while creating a more meaningful legacy than my father had ever imagined. Morning brought Morgan's report. Spencer Accounting was indeed struggling with loans against both the business and my parents' home. Their client base was solid but aging, with few new acquisitions in recent years. The firm had made minimal investments in technology or modern accounting practices. I spent the day working on my idea, making calls to my legal team and foundation director. By afternoon, I had a preliminary plan in place, one that would be announced at the wedding reception tomorrow. Chelsea called as I was reviewing the documents. "June, can you come early tomorrow, around 10? The hairstylist wants to do a trial run with your hair." "Of course. Everything okay after last night?" "Yes, fine. Mom told me what happened. I'm sorry, I had no idea they were going to ambush you like that. It's not your fault, and it's being handled." "What does that mean?" She sounded worried. "It means I'm taking care of it, in my way. Trust me?" "Always," she said immediately. "See you tomorrow." The morning of the wedding dawned perfect and clear, as if ordered specifically for the occasion. I arrived at the lake house at 10 to find it transformed into a bridal preparation zone. Flowers, dresses, makeup kits, and champagne covered every surface of the main floor. Chelsea was in the master suite, surrounded by bridesmaids and her mother. When she saw me, she broke away from the hairstylist to hug me tightly. "You're here!" "Mom, June's here!" Aunt Linda emerged from the adjacent bathroom, already dressed in her mother-of-the-bride outfit. "June, wonderful. The hairstylist is ready for you after Chelsea." I spent the next few hours being pampered alongside the other bridesmaids, sipping champagne and listening to wedding day stories. My mother appeared briefly, already dressed for the ceremony, to kiss Chelsea's cheek and tell her how beautiful she looked. She nodded to me but didn't approach, a restraint I appreciated. By 4 o'clock, we were all ready. Chelsea was radiant in her gown, a classic A-line design that suited her perfectly. As maid of honor, I wore a deeper blue than the other bridesmaids, the color nearly matching the sapphire earrings I'd given her, which she'd chosen to wear today. "Something blue," she said, touching them when she caught me looking. And something from the person who showed me women can be whatever they want to be. I blinked back unexpected tears. "You're going to make your makeup run," she laughed. "Worth it to see the great June Spencer get emotional." The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. I stood beside Chelsea as she and Thomas exchanged vows. Under the floral arch, the lake shimmering behind them. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers. At the reception, I was seated at the head table with the wedding party. My parents were at a table nearby, with other family members. Throughout dinner, I caught my father watching me, his expression a mixture of residual anger and something that might have been regret. After the main course, the best man rose for his toast, followed by the father of the bride. Then the DJ announced, "And now, the maid of honor, June Spencer." I stood, glass in hand, facing the 100 or so guests. For those who don't know me, I'm Chelsea's cousin. Until recently, we hadn't seen each other in nearly a decade. My fault, not hers. This earned a small laugh from the crowd. Chelsea has always been special to me. When we were growing up, she followed me around the lake house, asking endless questions about computers and technology, even when everyone else thought I was wasting my time. I glanced at my father, who had the grace to look away. What I didn't realize until this week was how much I had influenced her. How my pursuit of what I loved, despite the obstacles, showed her something important about choosing her own path. I raised my glass toward Chelsea. To Chelsea and Thomas, may you always support each other's dreams, even when they seem impossible to everyone else. As the guests applauded, I remained standing. I'd like to take this opportunity to make an announcement. In honor of Chelsea and Thomas's marriage, and in recognition of the support I should have given to my hometown years ago, I'm establishing the Spencer Foundation for Young Women in Technology. A murmur ran through the crowd. Chelsea's eyes widened. The foundation will provide scholarships, mentorship, and resources to young women from Meadowbrook and surrounding communities who wish to pursue careers in technology and computer science. It will be headquartered here in Meadowbrook, creating new jobs and opportunities for the community that raised me. I looked directly at my parents now. My mother's hand was pressed to her mouth. My father sat rigid in his chair. Additionally, the foundation will include a business development center, offering technological support and modernization services to local businesses seeking to adapt to our digital world. The first client of this center will be Spencer Accounting, which will receive a full technological overhaul and digital transformation at no cost. The room had fallen completely silent. I continued. This is not a takeover or a partnership. Spencer Accounting will remain independently owned and operated by Richard and Catherine Spencer. The foundation will simply provide the resources and expertise needed to ensure its continued success in a changing market. I raised my glass once more to new beginnings, second chances, and the future of Meadowbrook. The applause was thunderous. Chelsea was the first on her feet, followed quickly by Thomas and then the entire room. Through the crowd, I saw my father sitting stunned, my mother wiping tears from her eyes. As I returned to my seat, Chelsea squeezed my hand. "That was incredible. Did you just save your parents' business while simultaneously showing them up?" "I created something meaningful that will help girls like we once were," I corrected her. "The rest is just a bonus." The reception continued with dancing and celebration. I participated as required by my maid of honor duties, but kept a careful distance from my parents. This was Chelsea's day, and I wouldn't risk another confrontation. It wasn't until the cake had been cut and the party was in full swing that my father approached me at the bar. "That was quite an announcement," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I thought you'd appreciate the business solution," I replied, equally measured. "It's not what I expected." He seemed to be choosing his words with unusual care. "A foundation in the Spencer name, here in Meadowbrook." It seemed fitting. He nodded slowly. "The modernization services, that was thoughtful, more helpful than a loan would have been." "I know. That's why I did it that way. June, He stopped, clearly struggling. Richard. Spencer had never been good with apologies or admitting he was wrong. What you've built is remarkable. I should have said that years ago. It wasn't quite an apology, but from my father, it was monumental. Thank you. Your mother and I have discussed it, and we'd like to contribute the lake house to your foundation. As headquarters, it's too large for just us now, and it would be fitting. A Spencer building for a Spencer foundation. The offer stunned me. The lake house was their most valuable asset, the center of family gatherings for generations. Dad, that's the right thing to do, he finished for me. Too late, probably. But still right. I studied him, the proud man who had never understood me, now offering an olive branch in the only way he knew how. I'll have my legal team draw up the paperwork. The foundation can pay fair market value. No. He shook his head firmly. It's a donation, tax deductible, of course. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I am still an accountant. Later that evening, as the reception wound down, I found myself on the dock, looking out over the lake. The water was still, reflecting the stars above like a perfect mirror. Behind me, the sounds of celebration continued. Music, laughter, the clink of glasses. There you are. Chelsea joined me at the edge of the dock, her wedding dress gathered carefully in one hand. Needed some air, I explained. It's been an eventful day. That's an understatement. She smiled. You created a foundation, saved my uncle's business, and apparently acquired a lake house headquarters all in one speech. I laughed. Efficient, right? Seriously though, June. What you did today was amazing. Not just for Uncle Richard and Aunt Catherine, but for all the girls who'll benefit from those scholarships. It felt right. Creating something positive out of all this old family drama. Chelsea nudged my shoulder gently. So, does this mean you'll be visiting Meadowbrook more often? Checking on your foundation? I suppose it does. The realization was surprising, but not unwelcome. I've hired a local director to handle day-to-day operations, but yes, I'll need to be more hands-on during the establishment phase. Good. She beamed at me. Because I've missed my big cousin, and I think Meadowbrook has missed you too. From the shore, Thomas called Chelsea's name. Time for their departure. Go, I said, hugging her. Be happy. I am. She squeezed me tightly, then pulled back. You know what the best wedding gift was? Having you here, seeing you reclaim your place in this town, on your terms. As she hurried back to her waiting husband, I remained on the dock, contemplating her words. My place in this town, on my terms, not as Richard Spencer's difficult daughter or the girl with impractical dreams, but as June Spencer, CEO and founder. Creator of opportunities rather than seeker of approval. The moon cast a silver path across the lake, the same lake I'd gazed at as a teenager, dreaming of escape. Now it represented not confinement, but possibility. The Spencer Foundation would change lives here, opening doors I'd had to force open for myself. I heard footsteps on the dock and turned to find my mother approaching cautiously. The newlyweds just left, she said, stopping a few feet away. It was a beautiful wedding. Yes, it was. She gestured to the empty space beside me. May I? I nodded, and she joined me at the edge of the dock, her formal dress incongruous against the rustic wood. Your father told me about your conversation, about the lake house. It's a generous offer. It's the least we can do. She looked out over the water rather than at me. June, I owe you an apology. We both do. We were wrong about your dreams, wrong to push you toward a life you didn't want. The words I'd waited 10 years to hear. They should have felt more triumphant, but instead, they simply felt sad. Acknowledgement of a decade lost to stubbornness on both sides. Thank you for saying that. When you left, she continued, I was angry at first, then worried. But as you began to succeed, really succeed, I felt something unexpected. Pride. Not just that you were doing well, but that you'd had the courage to follow your own path. Something I never did. I turned to look at her properly. What do you mean? I wanted to be an architect. Did you know that? When I shook my head, she smiled faintly. I was good at it too. Had a scholarship to Cornell, but my parents thought it wasn't a suitable career for a woman who would eventually want a family. So I studied business administration. Instead, worked as an office manager. Married your father. Mom, I had no idea. How could you? We never talked about dreams in our house. Only practicalities. She straightened her shoulders. When I saw you fighting for what you wanted, part of me recognized that fire, and part of me resented it, that you had the strength I lacked. The revelation shifted something fundamental in my understanding of my mother. All those years of her supporting my father's dismissal of my ambitions, it hadn't been agreement, but resignation. The pattern of her own life repeating. It's not too late, you know, I said quietly, to pursue architecture. She laughed softly. At 63? Perhaps not professionally, but I've been taking classes at the community college. Computer-aided design. It's quite fascinating. That's wonderful. And it was. The thought of my proper perfect mother finding her own path after all these years was unexpectedly moving. Your foundation, she said, changing the subject. Will you need help setting it up locally? I have time and reasonable organizational skills. The offer surprised me. Are you proposing to work for the Spencer Foundation, Mom? Volunteer at first. If I'm suitable, perhaps something more formal later. She smoothed her dress nervously. I'd like to be part of what you're building, June, if you'll have me. The moon continued its path across the sky as I considered her offer. My mother, who had never quite understood me, asking to be part of my vision, not to control it or redirect it, but to support it. I think we could use someone with your organizational skills, I said finally. The foundation director will be in touch. She nodded, blinking rapidly. Thank you. After a moment she added, your father may need more time to adjust to all this. He's proud, like you. I know. And I'm not expecting miracles, just progress. We stood together in companionable silence, watching the moon's reflection on the water. Behind us, the wedding reception was ending, guests departing with laughter and calls of goodbye. A chapter closing as another began. I should go help with the cleanup, my mother said eventually. Will we see you before you leave? I'm staying through Wednesday to meet with local officials about the foundation. Perhaps dinner on Tuesday? Her face lit up. We'd like that. Your father will be on his best behavior, I promise. As she walked back toward the house, I remained on the dock, contemplating the day's events. I had come to Meadowbrook expecting confrontation and perhaps vindication. Instead, I'd found a way forward, not by erasing the past, but by building something new from its foundations. The Spencer Foundation would be my legacy here, more lasting than any business deal or family reconciliation. It would create opportunities for girls with dreams as impractical and magnificent as mine had once seemed. It would transform this small town that had both nurtured and constrained me. And perhaps, in some small way, it would heal the fractures in the Spencer family, not through compromise or capitulation, but through the creation of something worthy of our shared name. I took one last look at the moonlit lake, then turned toward the shore. Tomorrow, I would begin the work of establishing the foundation. I would meet with lawyers and local officials, draft mission statements and organizational structures. I would transform the lake house from a symbol of family conflict into a center for innovation and opportunity. But tonight, in this moment between past and future, I simply allowed myself to feel the weight of what had been accomplished. Not just the professional success I'd fought for, but the personal reckoning I'd been avoiding for a decade. I had returned to Meadowbrook not as the daughter seeking approval, but as the woman who no longer needed it. And in that transformation lay a victory more profound than any business achievement. As I walked back toward the house, the future headquarters of the Spencer Foundation, I felt something I hadn't expected to find in my hometown. Peace. Not perfect or complete, but a beginning. A foundation upon which to build whatever came next.